Hopefully, we're approaching a moment where we might see a vaccine to COVID-19, and that might mean that we can finally see the end of this quarantine. Now look, there's going to be difficulties. A successful and equitable distribution of a vaccine and treatment are going to be hampered by our limited healthcare system. But here's the thing. Even if we could wave a magic wand and eradicate COVID-19 from the globe, we still have a long way to go to repairing the severe damage that has been done to working people. Put it simply, we need more than a vaccine to get out of the COVID crisis. If the pandemic wasn't bad enough, COVID has exposed the failures of our economic system. Workers who have been living paycheck to paycheck in workplaces without adequate safety precautions and a lack of economic security caused by decades of wage stagnation have been hit hardest. As bosses cut their losses and lay off workers and cut their hours, even those who didn't lose their jobs have been asked to forego yearly raises and their hard-earned benefits. Put another way, the government and the rich of this country have asked us all to sacrifice collectively. But have they? While COVID-19 has been a living nightmare for most of us, the billionaires are raking it in. Chuck Collins of the Institute for Policy Studies found that since March, billionaires' wealth has grown by $1 trillion. You heard that right, $1 trillion. As the COVID crisis has worsened and we have all suffered, 650 billionaires saw their total wealth increase by 34%, reaching a total over $4 trillion. 29 of these billionaires even saw their wealth double. People like Jeff Bezos increased his wealth by $70 billion, up from $113 billion at the beginning of March to $182.4 billion today. Dan Gilbert, the chairman of Quicken Loans, saw his wealth explode to over $37 billion. Hear this. His wealth jumped from $6.5 billion at the beginning of the COVID crisis to $43.9 billion today. That's a jump of 575%. And Chuck also notes that this didn't happen after the 2008 crisis. That took 4 years for total wealth to exceed its 2008 level. And why is this? Some of this wealth has just been, the profiteering of exploitative industries. Other have been the result of benefit programs and actions by the government and the Federal Reserve to materially support the needs of the super rich in crisis. Many of these were developed after the 2008 crisis, and many more, like the Federal Reserve directly buying corporate debt, were developed as emergency measures to respond to the COVID crisis. This signaled to the most speculative industries that through thick and thin, their interests will be protected by the US of A. Has that government been there for you? Has the Federal Reserve been there for you? What has it been like for the rest of us in this country? Millions have lost their income, face eviction, and are struggling to provide for themselves and those around them. A Pew Research Center survey found that overall, 1 in 4 adults have had trouble paying their bills, a third have dipped into savings or retirement accounts, and 1 in 6 have borrowed money from friends or family or gotten food from a food bank. The benefits from the CARES Act were welcome but inadequate. Let's not forget that $1,200 stimulus payment that we got, 35% of that went to debt repayment. I can tell you all these stories, but you know them. Increased unemployment payments were welcome, but they weren't enough. And for millions of Americans, their federal pandemic benefits are set to expire at the end of the month, if they haven't already. Gig workers, independent contractors, and the self-employed who lost their jobs due to COVID are set to lose their weekly benefits. That's around 7.3 million Americans. 4.6 million more are set to lose their emergency unemployment payments under the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Act. BLS statistics have revealed that 3.6 million Americans have been unemployed for months at a time. Across the country, there are 10 million fewer jobs today than there were in February. And among the around 11 million people who are unemployed, the median duration of joblessness is around 19.3 weeks. And that's just people who are trying to keep their jobs. People who are trying to keep a roof over their head have been suffering immensely. A report from the National Low Income Housing Coalition found that 6.7 million households are likely to be evicted in the coming months. That puts in total 19 million people potentially at risk of losing their homes. These numbers rival the foreclosures and dislocation that you saw after the subprime housing bust. And these numbers don't even include all of the people who have been kicked out of their homes by sleazy landlords who have found ways to avoid the eviction moratorium. So while the federal government and the Federal Reserve were finding historic ways to make sure that the billionaire class not only didn't see their wealth diminished, and in fact increased it, the rest of us suffered. Even though your life was interrupted, this system that pumps money to those at the top, regardless of the conditions outside, that system continued working fine, and that needs to change. So yes, stay at home, but what are people supposed to do? Years of destructive anti-worker policies, the rise of at-will employment and independent contractors have left most American workers at the will of their employers. That's not a place that you want to be in a pandemic. The way that our government has tried to fight the COVID crisis has been a disaster. But the solutions are simple. We need monthly payments and Medicare for all. But with few friends in powerful places, few and far between, we've received little help. So it's really great that we might be able to see the end of this quarantine and the development of a vaccine and treatment for COVID-19. But the world we will be re-entering will be one of a higher concentration of wealth. Entire industries will be gutted. We know the playbook. Those people who got tremendous sums of money will use the fact that because so many have been devastated, prices are going to become cheaper. That these people who got all this money during this crisis are going to be able to buy businesses across the country for pennies on the dollar. It doesn't have to be this way. We need a Green New Deal, but at this point, we just need a New Deal in general. We need debt forgiveness and ongoing payments to American people until we can get back on our feet after this crisis. The economic devastation of our government's failed COVID policies will be with us after COVID, unless we build grassroots and working class movements to make our demands heard. It's going to have to come from us, working people across the country, because for those at the top, COVID has been good for business.